Good evening.
Hi, Debbie.
Hey. Hey, Jim. Wait, do you ever go by Jim or it's always James? It's always James, right?
You know, my family calls me Jim, so I prefer James, thank you.
Yeah. I just, as it came out of my mouth, I was like, that's not right.
And are you always Debbie or Deborah, or what do you prefer?
I mean, I pretty much only use Debbie. There were years when I at work would use Deborah, but then I kind of gave up.
Are you and you're Y, Debby, right?
I am. And yeah, I mean, currently at work, like they just went ahead and made my email with Debbie, and it was like when that first happened, I was like, huh. So I'm used to having like formal stuff with my full name. And then I'm like, thank goodness, because spelling, my last name is enough work that it's like I'd rather just have it be able to say Debbie with a Y dot,
And are you Deborah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My sister's a Debbie. My sister's a Debbie and a Deborah, but she uses IE instead of Y.
Yeah, I think that's more common. But just apropos of referring to James as Jim, hey Kyle,
Hello.
I only had it happen in one workplace when I worked for American Express. And I don't know if there's something about working for a big American company, but it was the only time where there were a few people who called me Deb. And I was like, really? That's a place you're going to go in the workplace? Like, no.
No, I like Debbie.
Yeah. It does date me though, I think. It is an era. All right. Kyle, before we get started, I have to say I was like looking for your title because I know you have like an acting blue. And then it came up. I was like, oh my God, you're like a celebrity. You got one of those like New York Times, what Kyle Gorman does on his weekend. I was like, oh my goodness.
Yes. I was fortunate to get a Sunday routine in 2021.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I feel like now I made it. I'm like, I don't know what I need to do anymore. I should just like retire.
Hard to top that, yeah.
Yeah.
You can aspire to be chair of the community board someday.
That's also very true.
I was chair many years ago, and it's about as thankless a job as there is. It really is. So I always, reach out to all of my successors.
What years were you chair, Jim?
1985 and 1986, I think.
Wow.
Debbie,
Yeah,
how long
I've
have you
been
been doing it? Oops, sorry.
How long have you been on the board?
I was asking how long Debbie has been doing it.
Oh, on the committee?
As chair, yeah. No, as chair.
Right. I think I want to say I started in 2018 and then I was not the chair in 2019 and then since 2020 and forward.
Because it is to do a full-time job and then do this, it's a lot.
Yeah, although I think Jim was referring to chair of the entire board.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Well, I think they're all hard.
Yeah.
Well, they are, but the big. Well, actually, I'll give you my secret. I was a high school teacher, and if you can control a high school class, you can probably control a community board.
I agree with that. Yeah, that's a good analogy.
So I had good training in the high school. Yeah, and by the way, look, I have two hands again. I had broken my clavicle.
Oh, very
so I'm much
good.
better. Yeah.
Oh, good.
And are you
Um,
doing some rehab now on it?
I'll be doing that soon, right? Yeah. Yeah, I tripped and fell and I broke my clavicle and I broke a rib and yeah. So now I've concluded I've gotten to the age where although I like to have grand thoughts while I go walking, now I decided I will concentrate on the walking and I'll have the grand thoughts when I'm home in the chair.
You had
So-
no lung damage though with the cracked rib, right?
Fortunately not. Right.
Well, I'm glad to see you have two hands again.
Yeah. No, the thing is I couldn't do my ponytail. So for like a month and some, I looked like a wild man with all the hair.
All
I
right,
call
I'm
them my
just gonna
wild
give
man
like
look.
another minute or two.
Do you know if Jay's gonna join us? Because he's home from the hospital.
Oh, he is. Okay.
Yeah. But I don't
Um,
know whether he was intending to, because sometimes he's not very, I know, sometimes his phone works, sometimes, I don't understand.
I think he has
He
an
was-
iPad now, maybe for him for his use for meetings.
Well, I know he was
but
supposed to get one, whether he got it or not is another story.
Um,
Yeah.
and then, but I do know Mary will not be on tonight because she is away.
Uh,
Okay, 1 second. So I'm just wanted to get down attendees. I'll call it to order in just a minute. Hey, Leo. Okay, so Leo is here. Hey,
yeah.
Lyle.
Yeah, I see Lyle is with us too. Hello, Lyle.
Hello, Lyle.
Evening, everyone. How are you?
Fine,
Good.
thank you.
Cool.
Happy March.
Happy March.
Okay, so with. Okay. All right. So it's 7:05. I'd like to call the meeting order. Thanks, Chanel. My name is Debbie Nabavian. I chair CB12 Traffic and Transportation Committee. I'd like to introduce members of the committee who are with us this evening. We have Jim Berlin, new member, although not a new attendee because he's been with us for much, basically since the spring. James Bosley, we're so glad that you are fully properly on the committee now.
Thank you.
Jody Harrison, also a new member. Bruce Robertson, and Assistant Chair of the committee, Leo Jimenez.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. So tonight we have two things on the agenda. So we're gonna start with DOT. Kyle Gorman is here along with Lyle. Kyle had made a presentation. He leads well, I'll let him introduce himself when the time comes, but a public space group within DOT. And he had presented at the Borough Board meeting a short while back. And so Porfirio had suggested to CB12 that we might be interested in seeing the presentation. And, you know, when I knew we had Wheels coming as we did last month, talking about a public space program, I just asked Kyle if maybe slightly different than what he did at Borough Board, which was focused only on the Open Streets program, which I think we're all pretty familiar with. I asked him if he might come this month and just give us a general presentation of sort of all the programs in his you know, purview, because it occurred to me that there might be some other ones that we want to also understand as options. And so I asked him if he would sort of modify what he did with Borough Board and come it together. So, and then before I pass it to Kyle and to Lyle, I just want to say that, let's see, two things. The second item is a broader discussion, which is something, bits of which we have had over the course of a year or two, but I just wanted to kind of bring it together. And if we decide as a committee to do a resolution, so be it. If we decide not to, so be it. But I felt like I didn't want to kick the can further down the road, just about the very many competing demands for curb space at the curb. And particularly with a little activity on the open dining program, I wanted to sort of come back to that. Just by way of update, again, I really am going to pass to DOT in just a moment. I do want to say there's been a lot of action at 181st Street A Station. The escalators were supposed to be up by the end of February. They had to be delayed through March 2023. So as much as, 1 month more. As people may remember, but may not remember, because I certainly had to go back to the presentation, the ramp from Overlook Terrace into the 181st Street A Station will be closed for several months as they make that ramp ADA compliant. However, MTA will not close the ramp until the escalators are open for business, which is logical and appropriate. To complicate matters, and we've heard a lot of people on this, there were rogue signs put up, not MTA signs, announcing that the ramp would close on March 17th. I don't know who did that. Some of the construction workers, apparently people have chatted with, some of them are saying March 17th. I don't think testing of the escalators will be done. The MTA is going to reach out to the many stakeholders, electeds, and I assume CB12 in the coming days to talk to us about how they are going to do signage, since they don't have a date certain, since they don't know what date in March escalators are closed, and therefore when they'd want to close the ramp. They're going to talk to the electeds about what they're thinking, because usually they won't put up that kind of signage until they have a date certain. But obviously they need to tell people more formally to be prepared for the ramp closure. So I think there will be something in the next week or so. But again, there's just been a lot of sort of chaos. There's also, I think, a lack of clarity that because of the ADA project, the weekend closures that were announced, have been good communications in terms of the lack of train service over the weekend north of above 168th. But that means that the whole station is closed, but they don't sign the station saying the station is closed. So some people think they can still do the flyover using the elevator, and they cannot, and then they get upset. So I talked to the MTA about that today. As people know, the North Walk to the George Washington Bridge opened in the past month. It is glorious and beautiful. Work began the next day on the South Walk. That is now closed, and that'll begin a probably 3.5-year process to refurbish. Well, it's mainly about the suspension cables on the bridge, and at the same time, during that, they will refurbish the South Walk in the way they did the North Walk. And so that's a story there. So those are my updates. With that, I'm going to pass it to Kyle and Lyle and DOT, and welcome.
Great, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Kyle Gorman from the City's Department of Transportation. Like Debbie mentioned, I work in what I like to think of as a special part of the Department of Transportation known as the Public Space Unit. So we are the part of the city's DOT that really is, has a whole series of programs that I'm going to get into tonight that really promote the use of streets as public space, everything from open streets, plazas, shared streets, street seats and beyond, which, like I said, I'll touch on. And, we really do value streets as public space. Obviously, as I don't need to tell anyone here, but compared to most cities in this country, New York City is predominantly a place where we walk, bike, rely on public transportation. But of course, there's millions of New Yorkers that also own cars. But, moving forward at the city's DOT, we, as laid out in the streets plan, we've really been committed to promoting these different types of road users and making sure that we have a whole slew of different types of infrastructure that make it safer and easier to walk, bike, or ride public transit. So that's why I'm here tonight. Like Debbie said, is to sort of give you a little bit of a brief overview of some of the public space oriented programs that we have, and then I'll be happy to take any questions that you have after the presentation. So you should see my screen shared right now. There's a slide that has a photo in the background of a pedestrian plaza, and it's titled NYC DOT Public Space. So within the public space unit, we really like to think of ourselves of existing in a public space ecology where there's a constant feedback loop within all of our programs that really feed into each other in this symbiotic way that really, like I said, are designed to promote the use of streets as public space in a safe and efficient way. So everything that we do is embedded in community partnership. All of the programs that I'm going to go over tonight do have community partners attached to them in 99% of instances. Like Debbie had mentioned, you recently heard a presentation from our partner Wheels. They are an open streets partner on 182nd Street, and they participate in open streets. But like I said, every single one of the programs like street seats, shared streets, plazas, and beyond have a different type of partner attached to it. We also do things like public realm planning. The city's DOT is, often doing a number of, small scale and wide scale different types of planning initiatives. We're also participating in that different types of scale of planning and making sure that streets are being designed with the public realm in mind. We also really value that after we create a public space, there's so much work to be done after the ribbon cutting, we like to say. So everything from maintenance and programming and just making sure that these spaces are used in a positive way and do, stay in a good state of repair and have the facilities that people need to, go about their day-to-day lives in New York City. So I'm going to first touch on Open Streets. Open Streets is actually the program that I created in the pandemic and also manage on a day-to-day basis, but I also help facilitate a number of the other programs that we'll touch on tonight. But like I said, let's first start with Open Streets. So there are three distinct types of open streets. The first is limited local access. The second is our full closure. And the third is the full closure for schools. So first, I'll touch on limited local access open streets. So these are streets that are designated as bike and pedestrian priority streets, and really their intended use is for their use and enjoyment actually. But as you can see from the photo, it still does allow for local vehicle access and parking, local pickups, drop-offs, loading, anything that anyone who drives a car and does have business on a particular block is able to access that open street. The one that's pictured on the screen is actually 34th Avenue in Jackson Heights, which is our largest open street in the city at 26 blocks long and 1.3 miles. When people drive on these open streets, they are advised to adhere to a 5-mile-per-hour speed limit, and we work with a whole slew of different types of community-based organizations, bids, and groups of neighbors to execute this particular type of open street. The next type of open street is the full closure. So compared to the one that I just presented, this one doesn't actually allow for any local through traffic or parking. So it's completely closed to vehicles. And when you remove the vehicles from the equation, you see a whole variety of different types of new uses and programming, such as outdoor dining, markets, and from just new activations that aren't typically seen in a streetscape. Similar to the limited local access open streets, we work with all different types of organizations to execute these types of open streets. The third type of open street is the full closure for schools. So this is what a lot of folks call play streets. As I'm sure many of you know, Play Streets have a very long history, actually a nearly 100-year history of just really supporting schools in different ways. Throughout that 100-year history, Play Streets really have seen a lot of different types of management structures, a lot of different owners, and a lot of just peaks and pits really throughout those 100 years. So we're really excited to actually now give that program a full home. And it's going to be its forever home. And I think it really belongs at the Department of Transportation because this really allows us to work closely with schools to not only facilitate spaces for outdoor learning and recreation, but also with our wider team at DOT through our school safety division, we can also work with schools to permanently redesign streets around schools to make sure that they are safe, especially for kids. So we do use Play Streets predominantly for outdoor recess, outdoor learning, as you see on the screen in front of you. But a number of schools also use this for safer pickup and drop-off operations, and lots of just different types of uses to promote the use of streets as public space and also support educational enrichment for New York City students. Schools can still apply for an open street if they want to for next academic year. They actually have up until April 14th to do so. So in terms of just the programmatic updates, we're really fortunate that the mayor and the city council have made a really significant investment in this program. We are really encouraging all partners, no matter their background, their experience, their capacity, to apply to the program, and we'll work with you to right size the level of support that we can offer. We have nearly $10 million actually in the program, and a certain slice of this funding is actually reserved for through a contract that we have with the Horticultural Society of New York to fully manage up to 30 sites across the city. So this means we can help provide barrier setup and takedown, horticulture care, sanitation support, permitting, and just technical assistance in navigating the city bureaucracy, I like to say. There's also funding on the table up to $20,000, and we work with a number of other agencies and organizations to offer other types of grant opportunities. Usually, and this is the sort of flow that we've gotten into over the last 3 years, is that Open Streets, the season kind of formally launches in April around Earth Day. So more about the upcoming season will be shared in approximately a month. There's a number of new layers to the program that we're working on because the program was made permanent by city council legislation passed in 2021. This allows DOT to create a certain set of rules for the program through the formal rulemaking process the city has. So just, formally adopting all the language about the specifics to the operations of the program, what's required, what's not allowed, what is allowed, things like that are things that we've been working on. We also have a number of other partnerships with programming providers and other entities that we'll touch on in just a few minutes. And also we work with entities to have concessions and markets as layers to Open Streets as well too. And another central theme to the Open Streets program, which really feeds into all the programs that I'm going to talk to you about in just a few minutes, is that we are required per the legislation passed to make the Open Streets program permanent, to take a look at some of the more successful Open Streets corridors and permanently redesign them as public space. So 34th Avenue is actually an excellent example of a recent transformation that we were able to execute in 2022. A number of blocks along that 26 block long stretch have been redesigned as pedestrian plazas, shared streets, and general other types of traffic calming and public realm benefits have also been added. And we're working on a number of other open street sites all across the city, notably Berry Street in Williamsburg, Underhill Avenue also in Brooklyn, Avenue B in the Lower East Side. One of the first examples of a permanent transformation was in your community board on Dyckman Street, which is now Quisqueya Plaza between Broadway and Seaman Ave. That block, as I'm sure you know, was an open street for a period of time. And then right at the end of 2021, it was permanently transformed into Dyckman Plaza. And then as of last week, it has now been formally renamed as Quisqueya Plaza. So really exciting that you all were kind of the first place to get that treatment, and we've been able to expand all across the city. Here's another example of some of the permanent transformations that we've been working on. This is a new intervention that has certain public realm and traffic calming benefits baked into one, with horticulture and other great facets being considered as well. This is a plaza that was recently implemented on an open street in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn. This used to be just a regular street for cars and parking, and then it was an open street in the pandemic. And last November, we all got out there, including myself, and painted the streets this nice turquoise color. Moving on to the next set of programs, like I said, which really the open streets programs feed into these programs. So the idea is that people start with open streets and then they evolve to these permanent transformations. The first is street seats, which I know at the top of the conversation, Debbie had mentioned a specific interest in curb management. This is one of our most prominent curb management public realm style programs. As you can see, there's opportunities for public seating or outdoor dining, as well as other amenities such as bike parking. There's obviously now a huge push in the city to also incorporate containerized waste. So we also agree at DOT that there are tremendous opportunities to better manage the curb and better have the curb reflect all the diverse uses of our city and the sort of behind the scenes sort of work that is required to also run a city. Here's another example of a street seat that we did with the Brooklyn Public Library in Brooklyn. So this was serving a sort of an institution to give more space during the pandemic outdoors for different types of programming that the library was offering. So they were able to build this structure. Here's just a little bit more. I'll send you the presentation later to take a deeper dive into all of this, but you can visit the program website to just get into a little bit more of the nuanced details about design requirements and the application, maintenance requirements, and so on. The next type of program I'm going to mention is shared streets. Shared streets are roadways where pedestrians, bikes, and vehicles all share the same right of way. We have a handful of these sites, predominantly actually in Lower Manhattan, where we've been able to redesign certain blocks of New York City streets as shared streets. The first being shown here is on Broadway between 24th and 25th Streets. So you can see we've redesigned the street to give a shared space amongst all the road users, whether it be a pedestrian or a cyclist. This one also had a block reversal, so really reducing the amount of traffic that was even accessing the block. But if someone did need to drive onto the block, they're immediately met with this advisory signage that says they need to share the road and drive at 5-mile-per-hour speeds as the roadway is so designed. These can be done in the interim phase with the paint, the granite blocks, the planters as seen in the photo here, but really the best way to do a shared street is through a capital project where a formal construction, a reconstruction of the street is able to be done. These are a relatively new concept to New York City per se. If any of you have been able to travel, especially in Europe, it's definitely a tried and true method there in a lot of ways. Here's another example of a shared street that we designed right south of 14th at University Place. Similar design, you can see this sort of S-curve street, which is a natural traffic calming element that is used in urban design. And you can see that also pedestrian, cyclists, drivers are in this instance also sharing the same right of way. So moving on to our plazas, which is sort of the pinnacle of our public realm toolkit. Pedestrian plazas are permanent closures of streets to pedestrian space. We can do these in the SIP or interim style with paint, planters, granite blocks, and movable tables and chairs as shown here. Or we can also formally build them out capitally, like I was just describing for the shared streets. We can also do the same for plazas. The thing to know is obviously a SIP or an interim project is on a very different timeline than a capital project. Capital projects take anywhere from 5 to 10 years when you consider planning and implementation, and SIPs take about 2 years. So there's different, very different levels to implementation, but you can see the benefits are pretty similar with the movable public seating, more pedestrianized space. This site in particular has umbrellas, but it just becomes a new town square community hub where people can come and gather and use for programming or just passive seating, you name it, it happens. Similar to Street Seats, I'll send the presentation afterwards for you to take a deeper dive into all the nuanced details of the Plaza program, but it is also an application-based program where people apply to the city's DOT. We work with you on, getting to the point where maybe we would actually implement, which obviously is a lot of steps with outreach, including to the community board and elected officials. And at the block level, it's not like someone just applies and we close the street. There's definitely a lot of outreach and implementation steps that we take to get there. So the last item that I'm going to mention is our public space programming initiative. One thing I mentioned at the start of the presentation is that maintenance is really, really critical here, and programming is a great way to make sure that these public spaces remain vibrant and well maintained. We have a catalog of nearly 100 different providers that we often call upon for. We did over 500 events in 2022 alone, and scaling up to do even more this year. But we really truly believe that having this different types of programming not only is a great way to support cultural institutions and different types of entities that offer this type of activity, but also really contributes to the positive use of the space. So we bring free activities and events to all DOT public spaces, whether it be a plaza, an open street, or a shared street seat. But we traditionally do try to focus on our high-need neighborhoods, priority investment areas as set forth by the New York City Streets Plan, or where we are, investing in different types of outreach with evolution and things like that. We've worked with a number of different entities over the last few years, especially during the pandemic, bringing Shakespeare through the public theater to open streets. One of our much loved activations, which was actually at the 182nd Open Street with Wheels, was the Bindleston Family Circus. We work with Make Music New York on June 21st, the longest day of the year, to offer all great music programming, Street Lab, Drag Queen Story Hour, and really everything in between. You can use programming to promote on an open street, for example, promoting active and healthy living. A lot of people do yoga classes and other sort of fitness instruction style classes. We also use these as the perfect venues to showcase all of the great arts and culture that exists here in New York City. This one in particular is the circus, like I just mentioned. Letting people sort of tap into the creative side. People really love to chalk up our streets and design really intricate sort of designs and other types of new creative endeavors on New York City streets. Learning and education, we've done a fabulous amount of work with the various libraries in New York City, as well as the organization Street Lab, that brings different types of books from all different sort of genres, as well as different languages. They also have really interesting cards about science, teaching kids all about the different ecology and ecosystems and animals and flora, fauna, everything in New York City, teaching them about that. They also have an arts-based cart, so really amazing opportunity to sort of use open streets as an educational venue as well. We've also found a lot of success in doing events and programming specific to dogs, sort of just connecting people who have dogs and bringing them together and doing events with different types of activities, also inviting local businesses to really showcase their different types of services that they might offer that are specific to dogs. So really amazing dog-centric attitude we take in public space. So that is actually my entire presentation. Thank you so much. There's a lot that I obviously went into. There's a lot of nuance to specific questions or the specific programs, but happy to take any questions you have tonight and also schedule a follow-up call with anyone who would like to discuss anything in greater detail. But Debbie, I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Kyle. That was really a great presentation. I have one question, and then before I hand it off to Jim Berlin, who has a question. One thing that I think we've had a little struggle with sometimes is that finding a partner who has the capacity for the maintenance and the programming and all that. You mentioned where you had like the Hort and the public something equity doodah. Was that to, I guess that's not a substitute for a maintenance partner, but you were saying like that's money so that DOT can sort of support and fill in gap. Like, what is that again?
So Yeah, so it's the public space equity program, and it kind of actually does replace the need for a maintenance partner. We still want to have, generally speaking, some sort of local grassroots organization to work with, just because, they're going to know their neighborhood better than we are. They also can be an excellent advocacy partner as well as a programming partner. But we recognize that taking on the day-to-day management, especially of a robust public space, is not necessarily within most people's wheelhouses. So the public space equity program is designed exactly to do that. I mean, there's a sort of equilibrium of different types of support that you might get, but the highest needs partners, though, the HORT is teed up to provide full maintenance services, cleaning, sweeping, setup, breakdown, the A to Z of it all. In
right.
certain instances, there's just funding, and then in certain instances, some people have so much capacity, money that they don't need our help, but that's not usually the case.
Yeah, I mean, because we've continued to go without a partner at 175th at Plaza de las Americas. Am I right, Lyle and Kyle?
So that
So-
one receives services from the HORT, actually.
They do. So that's how it's getting done. Because I know Whittick has been out of there for a while now.
Yeah, so we don't really have that grassroots partner that's attached to it, but that one is one of our sites that gets the full services via the HORT.
No, but that's helpful. And again, it's particularly helpful up here where it seems like, yeah, I mean, we can sort of see how it works. I mean, Columbia University has a lot of capacity, and so Haven Plaza works really well. Again, 175th Street.
Quisqueya is a similar situation too. There's different types of support that are offered there, maybe versus PDLA, and we have a little bit of a stronger partner there.
Right.
But they also receive services from the HORT.
Oh, that's great. Let me pass it to Jim Berlin.
I just have a few very positive comments. As I look at the stuff you've been doing, it just makes me so happy, because inherent in your programs in many cases is bringing more vegetation in. And the other thing is, when I was a kid, we had play streets, and then for a while I think they stopped approving them. It became an orphan program or something. So I'm so glad they're back. And the other thing, and again, I'm telling you what you already know and what you're already doing, but the trick, well, it's not a trick. The principle is, insofar as you can, is to calm the traffic and get people to want to drive slowly, and having twists and turns, that's just fine if it makes people drive slow. And so I think what you're doing, from my point of view, like I said, makes me very happy, and I congratulate you. And of course, insofar as such treatments will make our life better here in Northern Manhattan, we would be more than happy to work with you, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. James Bosley, then Leo. Hope I'm
Yes, hi,
doing that
thank you. I have two questions, if I may. How much, is there a target that the city has for how many of our streets can absorb the closed streets? I mean, it's not an infinite amount, I'm wondering. So when do you know that we have enough? When is enough enough? And how do you determine that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in New York City, we have over 6,000 miles of streets, and open streets at its peak was only like 50 to 60 miles of that at peak COVID. And then in 2022, we were doing about 28 miles of open streets last year. So realistically, open streets occupy a very narrow amount of the total amount of streets that we have. And with the streets plan, there's a sort of more comprehensive sort of goal that is set, it's amended on a sort of annual and 5-year basis. So realistically, I think our goal is to make all of our streets and all 6,000 miles as safe as possible for all road users, and where feasible, implement different types of public realm elements like open streets, plazas, shared streets as we go. I don't necessarily think there's a specific goal, but we probably want to continue to grow year over year.
Well, that kind of leads me to my second question, which was how much pushback do you get from local businesses, especially, well, I guess any local business, restaurants and others as well?
Yeah, so we actually just released an economic benefits report back in October of last year, and across the board with all the metrics, and I'll put the link in the chat in just a minute. Really, open streets are great for business, especially for restaurants and bars that are able to participate in the program. There's also definitely residual benefits felt by other businesses, maybe retail or different types of businesses that maybe can't act in an al fresco way, but on these corridors, there's just generally a lot more foot traffic. This is also New York City, predominantly, especially in places like Manhattan, the majority of your customers are coming by foot or bike or transit. They're not necessarily driving. So at the end of the day, there are tremendous economic benefits that exist within these public realm programs. And that's something that is true, not even just in New York City, it's been proven all around the world. So at the end of the day, this is great for business.
All right, thanks.
Good questions, James. Before we move to Leo Jimenez, I just want to say welcome, Robin Cruz. Good to see you, member of TNT.
Thank you.
Leo?
Thanks, Debbie, and thank you, Kyle, for the presentation. I think I can say for myself, I have a better understanding of how open streets work. Just two questions. The first one is, so how are these locations vetted? Right? During the presentation, I was trying to figure out, how do you guys choose a location for something like a full permanent street closure? Then my second question, I saw that you had on the presentation a list of about 6, 7 locations that you guys are working on converting, I guess, to an open street within the next year. Is anything coming to our area? Is there anything, that we should be looking out, coming within the next couple of years?
So all of the programs that I went over tonight are application-based. So basically community-based organizations, business improvement districts, groups of businesses or restaurants, educational institutions like public, private, and charter schools apply to the DOT to execute this. So it's not necessarily top down, it's more so bottom up. So that's why we go around and promote the application and ask people to apply. When folks then apply to the program, there's a lot of internal vetting that's done with all of the different operational units at DOT. We also work in close coordination with a number of our city agency partners, notably the NYPD and the fire department, as well as other entities like the Street Activity Permit Office, Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, and the list goes on, NDSNY, so all the agencies. You actually all should have received, if not last week, they will come this week, all of the notification letters for the open streets that will be within your district this upcoming year, or at least those that are going to be launching between now and June 30th. There'll probably be another second set of notifications that are going to come out in probably 6 to 8 weeks. So everyone should have received those, or they will receive them very soon. So that really is the most short-term impacts with open streets that are coming. Other than that, as it pertains to the work that I do, I can't say for certain what else is coming. Maybe Lyle knows about other projects, but I can say for DOT Public Space and open streets, we're not working on any permanent transformations right now. I believe that there is some money dedicated to the capital build out of Quisqueya Plaza. I don't have much information beyond that to share, but that's all I know for now.
Thank you.
Good questions. Jody?
I have to remember to unmute. I think this is absolutely fantastic and I'm really excited about it. I really wasn't clear though, when you did the presentation as to the application process, and I think you may have just answered that who actually gets to apply? Community board members or a community board can make recommendations as well, or no?
The community board could make a recommendation. I don't think it would probably be appropriate for the community board, though, to apply. But one thing I want to just be clear on is that OpenStreets applications can come from both formal and informal entities. So let's say there's a group of neighbors on a block who aren't necessarily a part of a block association or a civic association. They can just make the 186th Street Open Streets Coalition and apply to the program in that way. That
Okay.
specific language about formal or informal business or organizations is baked into the legislation. So we're actually required to work with informal entities, with the caveat being that if you are looking to get funding from the city will not offer individuals funding. It needs to go to a nonprofit. But we're usually able to work with entities to find a fiscal sponsor or fiscal conduit.
Okay, thanks.
All right, we're now gonna work, I'm just gonna call on Allegra Legrand in the attendee group. And Allegra, I will just as a reminder to anybody who has a question in the attendee group, you have 2 minutes for your ask. Gives another minute for the presenter to respond. And yeah, Allegra, go for it.
Okay, a couple things. One, I really would like to circle back around to the maintenance partner or buy-in for staffing. Open Streets have traditionally been distributed preferentially in wealthier districts because they have the financial resources and, quite frankly, the time resources to pay for that maintenance and staffing portion. And although there are organizations that can provide equipment, like you talk, like lab.org, their equipment things, that's great. But the staffing is paramount, and it can be like something that's, you can't overcome. I don't quite understand how commuters from Westchester get to use our streets for free, but when I want to have a street on my block, I've already paid my taxes for my block street cleaning, but now all of a sudden I have to do it again as volunteer work. It doesn't make sense to me, and it is truly an equity issue that keeps neighborhoods like Washington Heights and Inwood from fully realizing the benefits of this program. Second question I had was about the shared streets. So in light of the West Side Highway terrorist attack, they installed there quite a lot of those big bollard things so that cars can't physically speedy drive down there. So how do you control for that on those shared streets? And I also wonder, when I see your visuals of the shared streets, why you don't employ the similar mixed asphalt stripes of paving stone that slow cars down, even if they do cut the corners of the curves. Why those elements aren't ever implemented on those shared streets. 10th Avenue was paving stones when I moved to the neighborhood, and no one used to drag race it back then. But now that it's asphalted over, people go quite fast there now. So I was wondering about that. And then, do you guys care if I do a de facto bike lane installation in my neighborhood with those little seat stands? Can I install those things continuously for a mile to fill in some of your gaps? Thanks.
I don't have any advice on that last question. I would probably advise not doing that, but happy to have a conversation about maybe doing an event or something like that. But regarding your first question about equity and making sure that we have enough resources, I just want to be clear that DOT, thanks to a huge investment by the city council and the mayor, really have been able to address a lot of the issues that you brought up about the unequal distribution of the program, and making sure that all of our partners, regardless of their capacity, experience, background, what have you, are going to be set up for success. So, we can provide the staffing, we can provide the maintenance, the setup, the breakdown, the cleaning, the sweeping, the horticulture care where we have greenery and programming and things like that. So we're definitely set up to sort of address that equity issue that you're definitely bringing up, which is an important I think conversation to have about the program overall. So yeah, we're happy to work with any entity. I will say that we really do value having some type of partner to apply to the program, because like I said, we really want this to be a bottom up people partner powered movement, not necessarily the government or the city coming in to say out of nowhere, hey, this is going to be this way because we want it to be. Like we want people to apply because we recognize that having that local sort of cast of characters is really going to serve us well in the long term, rather than us just showing up out of the blue, because you know we don't have that sort of organic level of community organizing that people can do. So whereas there is an application, just know that we can provide the staffing, the funding, the programming, the resources, and the support to make that a success. To your question about bollards, definitely hear you loud and clear. Our preference is a capital build out of a shared street, like I mentioned in the presentation. And that would allow for the opportunities or elements like you're talking about with, you know, retractable bollards and more permanent infrastructure on the existing shared streets. We do use planters and granite blocks that are, you know, designed to stop cars as needed. And then that in capital projects, we also would be able to have the distinctive pavers and different types of surface treatments as you suggested. So a lot of those things that you're talking about are definitely all on the table. Obviously, things take time, but you know, more so than ever before, do people care about the public realm and evolving it and making permanent design changes. So it's an exciting time for public space in the city.
All right, super. Just can you drop the actual links to the nuts and bolts? Because when I've been going to this bi-weekly meeting for Open Streets, and it's news to me that there's money to pay for staffing, that I could raise money with a group here to buy into staffing. That's news to me. So if you wouldn't mind dropping in the exact links to those programs, I appreciate it.
Are you referring to the one that's hosted by Transportation Alternatives?
Yes.
Yeah, that's funny that you say that, because a number of our partners who receive services directly from the Fort, like 34th Avenue, Berry Street, Avenue B.
Yes, they come. The 34th
Yeah,
Avenue folks are there.
they all get that
Juan
staffing.
Restrepo, or however you say his name, he's there.
Okay, I like right. No,
Yes.
we're not going to back and forth. So
I don't want to back and forth. I just want links.
Well, I don't have any links that link to the specific numbers. I mean, you can take a deeper dive into the city budget, but if you go to the Open Streets application, it delineates a little bit more about the types of support that we have. And like I said, a lot of the folks who joined that call, I'm surprised to hear you say none of them get the support, because we've invested millions of dollars in the Open Streets program, and a number of those partners are beneficiaries of that support.
all right. This is really interesting. Again, it started with this little seed for me that, you know, Wheels' Open Street is in a tough spot because it's right near the busway. So I want to kind of understand how creative things can be over time.
Right, and I just want to be, sorry to interrupt you, Debbie. I just want to be clear that we have not been formally approached by Wheels or Futures Ignite based on whatever they presented last month.
Oh,
So,
no.
yeah.
I think for this summer, whatever they've applied for. That's already done. But I just know, again, that's an organization that's constantly thinking and evolving what they're trying, you know, they have a big goal and they're moving forward, I think, summer to summer. But I just kind of wanted to be smarter about also just what's out there and, you know, for any number of reasons. So I appreciate this. I am, as we sort of move into our discussion of prioritization and demands for curb space, Kyle, I'm going to say, if you want to hang out with us for just a little longer, I'd welcome that, but understand that I only committed you for your presentation. So bow out when you need to, and we will not be offended. And Lyle, I'm sure, can take good care of us and
Yeah,
address
I do
questions.
think that I'm gonna jump, but thank you so much for having me tonight. I will leave my email address, or actually you can reach out to me via Lyle if anyone wants to get in touch with me about anything tonight. But thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Lyle, you will be on your own speaking for the streets plan and everything, but I know you're up to the task. So in sort of almost every realm, we often come back to the issues of the competition in so many ways for a very limited resource, which is curb space. And when you think, so there are things, for example, that we've talked about in the context of the streets plan and DOT goals, like loading zones becoming all the more important as the amount of deliveries coming into the curb and residences skyrockets. Demand for residents to park. Demand for, we have city bikes. We have increasingly new programs like EV charging spots, like car share parking spots. We have dining sheds in our streets, which I will not hide, makes me absolutely berserk. We have the untouchable things where there doesn't seem to be political will to change, which is schools have some protected parking, like DOE parking spots on school days. NYPD around any precinct takes an enormous amount of parking. There is really a crisis of no bike storage. Now, I guess that could sometimes go on a sidewalk, but that sometimes might need to go on a curb. There's city bike. I'm sure I'm leaving out things. So, now the prior mayor, let's just sort of come back because through all the time of open dining, even though DOT was the agency tasked with managing it, during the pandemic, it felt like a much bigger commitment of the city that was really, it happened to be sort of implemented by DOT, but it wasn't necessarily, there were a lot of agencies involved and it seemed like a bigger issue. But then the pandemic sort of wound down in terms of the crisis for having the outdoor dining, which was a glorious program during the worst of the pandemic. And the prior mayor announced that it was going to be permanent, but then there wasn't city council legislation on it, or sort of it didn't get sorted out of what that would actually look like. And because of various slowdowns of establishing that legislation and the city council's process going on hold for a while, et cetera, we as a city have been left with sheds in the street. So giving priority to private businesses in our streets. And now finally, in the past, I guess, week, there's an announcement that the city council's, it's starting to move forward again. It will probably be something seasonal. But I guess I would like potentially, one, to have a conversation of, we can't have all things. There is not enough street space, right? So there has to be a level of priorities. We might think these are all good ideas at the curb, but when push comes to shove, we need to, I think there's an opportunity to articulate sort of how we think about it. Or not in the form of a resolution, but I sort of want to kind of hash through it a little bit with you all. But and again, this is sort of a personal thing, and we don't have to do it in the form of resolution because people may disagree, or you may just think there's no point in doing a resolution. But I have an idea. Well, one, I don't think a permanent outdoor dining, I think, should maybe take the gloves off on the sidewalks, which again used to have to come in front of community board and most people got said no to. I do not think there's any case to have them in our streets, given the demands that we have for that precious commodity. So I'm thinking, do we go for it now? But again, not have it just be about the outdoor dining, but contextualize it in the things, in everything that's going on. And while we can't necessarily do anything about, well, whatever. So I'm running on, but so I just wanted to have that conversation. So by my introduction, I guess you can tell I think the thing to go is the streeteries, as they're sometimes referred to. I tend to think, and I'm just putting this out here again for discussion, that the city's initiatives with loading zones and addressing the kind of congestion we see, and I'm not saying delivery trucks are the only source of congestion, but they are really critical. And I mean, recently we talked a little bit about them in front of residential areas. I guess I'm thinking right now more about the commercial strips. And so I sort of feel like that's important. And I feel like personally, while I'm very supportive of the city's overall streets plan, and to basically, which relies on getting people out of our cars, and all the initiatives that spring from that, as we've just heard in part from Kyle, but take on many forms. At the same time, we can't get around the fact that there are so many people for whom an ability to park on the street is important. And I'm going to pass it with that to Leo.
Thanks, Debbie. So I'm on the same path as you. I commute to work, I drive, but I've also been victim of walking by and seeing how a lot of these outdoor dining sheds let their garbage accumulate or they don't maintain it. So it's interesting to hear that the city council moved from permanent, I guess, situation to more seasonal. How would that work? Did they release anything on that? Maybe Lyle knows. Because if it's a seasonal thing, I think it's gonna cause issues for businesses. I'm sure it's expensive to erect these sidewalk dining sheds and bring them down, and so doing it kind of throws a bone or a wrench at our neighborhood residents, right? Like we're constantly having to remember where we're parking or why, because there's limitations, there's certain regulations that you can't park during certain hours. So with that being said, I'm not sure if you guys have any or if city council is working with DOT at this. I'm not sure if they passed anything yet, but how would that work if it's seasonal?
I'm going to say something and then I'm going to pass it to Lyle. So first of all, the council has not worked through it. It's just that there was nothing happening over an incredibly extended period of time, both before and after that one moment that they had some public sessions. And my understand, so nothing is set in stone, but I think in broad brushstrokes, what's being proposed is that the streeteries won't be as permanent structures, and it would be, I don't know, but only like, I don't know if it would be sort of like open streets, like it would go like April to November. I don't know, but it's something that's only part of the year. And I think what's being contemplated for anything in the street, I mean, there is some stuff, again, I think loosening the reins on what's happening on the sidewalks, but for streeteries, I think there's this idea that it's just more of a break it up and put it out there again the next day, but I'm not positive, and maybe Lyle has a little bit more information. But I think that the end result is some restaurants will decide not to do it because it's not really worth it, because they haven't, but I don't, Lyle, what can you say?
Well, there's not much to say right now. I think you pretty much said a lot, at least I was going to say, as far as what a permanent program looks like. So ideally, as everyone knows, this is something that's been in effect since the pandemic due to all the issues that we had gone through as a city. For now, the guidelines for open restaurants are still what are, I guess, considered to be the temporary guidelines. So whatever is on the DOT website to this point are the guidelines that we're working with. As far as what a permanent open restaurants program or plan looks like, as to be mentioned, that's still ideally to be determined as far as it being fleshed out. But I think some of the things that we would look at as far as, well, ideally, one of the things we would like to do is to try to have a little bit more rigid standards for those restaurants that are either in the program or those that want to apply. There were certain criteria that restaurants had to adhere to in order to apply. Up to this point, more or less, I think those standards are going to be a little bit more modified so that the criteria for participation within open restaurants is going to be a little bit more rigid. As to be mentioned, it's going to probably be more seasonal. I think it's going to be probably from April to October, I would say, beginning of April to end of October. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in order to apply currently, there was no cost. If you were trying to apply, I think that part of the permanent program would be to extend the cost to those restaurants that want to be a part of the program. But again, all of these things are essentially to be determined. So it has been quite a lengthy process as far as everyone just waiting for the city council to come up with those specific guidelines. We've pretty much been in limbo for the past couple of years. And like I said, we developed our own temporary guidelines, or we developed our own guidelines that are now considered temporary, at least, for the time being. So there are certain criteria that restaurants do have to adhere to currently. But yeah, we're still trying to essentially work out what exactly a permanent program looks like. Ultimately, like I said, it's more or less in the council's hands. It's taken extremely long, a lot longer than everybody assumed. But they're still trying to flesh that out. So there's not much I can say at this point. The only thing I can really speak on are these, I guess, what the current guidelines are. Like I said, those can be found on our DOT website. If you don't have the link, I can put it in the chat if anything.
Yeah, but that's still the emergency order stuff. So I think we all know what that looks like. But I should say also, during this limbo zone, which is now like 2 years, right?
Yeah.
There has been no enforcement. There has been, removing sheds of things that are out of business does not constitute enforcement of so we're not even enforcing if there's a problem.
Well, to this point, if there are, when it comes to abandoned sheds, so the thing
Not
is,
abandoned sheds. But anyway, but I'm violating my own rules, so I'm going to come back to that one. But first, I'm going to pass it to James Bosley.
Yes, hi. I'm not as much concerned with the curb situation, although I'm concerned with that as well. But I think the greater issue for me, someone who cycles, is they create a bottleneck that forces a cyclist into the other lane, we can maneuver around parked cars, but these sheds take up an entire lane. And if there's a shed on the other side of a two-way street, I'm thinking of 207 Street in particular, you have cars then moving into the other lane. So it's this bottleneck of two-way traffic is extremely hazardous. And I find that untenable. And I think now that where indoor dining is unrestricted now, I don't really see the need to keep these things open. I also wonder about emergency vehicles and, with the bottleneck that they create. That could also be an issue. I bicycle down, where there's even a bike lane, they build the shed, beyond the bike lane. But then you have people crossing from the shed back into the restaurant without looking for bicycles coming by. The wait staff knows whether, to look for cyclists, but the patrons do not. They're going to leave the shed and go inside to use the restroom, and they're not looking as they cross the bike lane for oncoming cyclists and motorbikes and whatever else is on the bike lane. So I think they're a total hazard, and I would totally support a reso to abandon them if we could. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I did it again. I don't know why I'm doing that, James. All right, do I have anybody else from the committee before I move into Jody?
Hi, Debbie. In preparation for this meeting, I just sort of sat down and did a little bit of an analysis. And the streets, in my opinion, and I agree with you completely, are used for transportation. First and foremost, sidewalks have to be for pedestrians. And when you look at transportation, we have cars, bike paths, buses, taxis, emergency vehicles, commercial vehicles, FedEx, Amazon, UPS, and then utility vehicles, and then a lot of other things that you mentioned as well. Sidewalk, and then on top of that, for curbs, we have loading zones, fire zones, car parking, restaurant sheds, bus stations, city bike stations, and open streets. Sidewalks, on the other hand, are made for pedestrians. And right now they're filled with garbage collection, newsstands, outdoor eating, and construction sheds. And I agree completely, you can't have it all. And you have to start to look, in my opinion, at what is most important. And for streets, it has to be transportation. And then, in my opinion, you have to have loading zones, because you can't have, everyone double parking on these streets. And I do believe that the restaurant shed has to go. You can go back to regulated sidewalk cafes, and, start to make room for the purpose of the streets, which is to move traffic.
Thanks, Jody. Robin?
Just want to second what Jody says. On 174 in Amsterdam, between 174 and 173rd, 173rd and 172nd, the ambulance, the vehicle, emergency vehicle, they always park on the sidewalk, and nobody can pass through. It's impossible for people. People need to go on the street to walk, and that's too much. Like 7 cars on the sidewalk parking every single day, more than 7. I even have pictures on and videotapes for those people who park there. And I see many kids and moms walking on the street because they cannot go through. So we got to do something with that.
Sorry, whose vehicles did you say, Robin?
Ambulance.
Really?
Yes.
On the sidewalk?
Yeah.
Have you?
Listen, Debbie, I pass through every single day through there, and I got videos. And I even talked to them. I said, listen, can you park at least on another spot? Because, kids from the school, they got to go to school every single day. And I can show you guys pictures and videos for those guys that walk on the street. Unbelievable.
That sounds more like an enforcement issue. If their car is parked on the sidewalk, I don't know if you've reached out to the precinct, but the local precinct should follow up on that. If that's a regular occurrence. Yeah, those, I mean, I don't know if they're just all ambulances, but any cars that are in the streets can be ticketed or on the
Lyle,
sidewalk.
Lyle, it's not the ambulance vehicle. It's the people who work there. They
Well,
park.
regardless, I mean, no one should be parking on the sidewalk. That the local precinct can still come and have those conversations with those who own those or operate those vehicles. But I mean, no cars should be on the sidewalk at all.
I went straight up to the precinct 333, and they didn't even do anything about it.
I'm just gonna sidebar something I should have, well, whatever. I was gonna mention, but I'm gonna just insert it here before we come back to the discussion and other people's comments. For a long time, we've been talking about this issue of like so much of what comes to our committee is actually traffic enforcement, and obviously, traffic is enforcement is with NYPD. And then we've talked about having a joint meeting with NYPD. And so Leo covered the executive committee this past month and has been sort of taking the lead on making this happen. And it looks like that's going to be April. So we are going to have a place to have these conversations because, we hear it so much. I don't think it even needs much repeating of how many situations we bump up against that relate to a lack of enforcement on that score. And I will, okay, now I'm just gonna, sorry, Robin, were you finished or did I cut you off?
I finished. Thanks.
Debbie, I'm sorry, if I can just add something.
Yeah, please.
So, and I guess this is more of a ask. If we do decide as a committee to move on with a resolution, I find it very, very, very difficult that it will pass the general board, just because there's quite a group that are advocates for small business in general. Is there any way we can add some type of language in the resolution that doesn't necessarily say, hey, we want to do away with everything, but more so if us as a community board, just like we do in the licensing committee, can have a say in who puts up sheds and who doesn't, right? After they submit the application, I think that it shouldn't be a bad idea so that it also comes through the board because we know our area the best. We know our community, and we know that certain locations, certain businesses don't really have proper use for these sheds. Some businesses still have it out, and it's been a while since I see any movement or any outdoor dining. Is there any way we can add that to the resolution?
Well,
to say, hey,
I guess my only counter to that is, well, maybe, and I haven't thought about it, but my first reaction is, if I were any other kind of business besides a restaurant, boy, would I be pissed, right? Like I've lost all these parts because they always say, oh, it's not that much frontage ultimately with permanent dining, but it is that amount of frontage if you just look at commercial corridors. Like if you take out residential blocks that don't have businesses anyway, then I think these sheds actually represent quite a bit. So if I had any other kind of business, any other thing besides a restaurant, people cannot get into parking spots and short meter spots, et cetera, et cetera. I guess I don't want to do that. Like I'm a little, so I'm a little reluctant to sort of get into the details of sort of proscribing how it would look. But I'm hearing you. And I also don't want to lose the sort of point, which doesn't necessarily only need to relate to restaurants, which is what you were saying is in the way that we community boards are involved in in sidewalk cafes. I think that's a good idea. What you're saying is like, okay, well, if community boards are involved in sidewalk cafes, then we should be involved with any streeteries that exist, and therefore can we sort of split the baby, meaning both say it's time for the street dining sheds to go, but to the extent that there is a program that allows it, that community boards have a say in it.
Yes.
What do you think?
that's
Okay.
fine.
All right. I mean, I'm a little bit thinking out loud, so let me ponder that a little bit more while I go to the attendee list. We'll have Allegra and then Ian.
Hi, thanks, Debbie. So, Jim
Oh,
is.
sorry,
fingering
Jim,
at
we'll
me.
come back to
You
you.
want to go first, Jim?
No, you can go, but I want to be.
Sorry, I didn't see you, Jim.
That's okay. No, go on, Allegra.
Okay, great, thanks. So I hear what you're saying about the dining sheds, and they have gotten to be gross, but I think it's because it was an emergency. Did we lose Debbie? And folks just like threw up like whatever they
No,
could.
you didn't.
Okay, without a lot of regulation. I think that a lot of the problems that James was speaking to with conflicts with cyclists have to do with there not being a consistency in design and expectation that, here's a crossing point for people moving into those sheds. But what I don't find consistent about the discussion thus far is the economic benefits that the open streets, having street space taken away from the subsidized car users and put back into the hands of businesses that actually generate wealth for a community. And as much as it irks me to say this is a giveaway of like a public space to a private entity, at least dining sheds are producing commerce. Parked cars on streets are degrading the commerce that happens in our streets. And the parked cars in our streets further are preventing like safe bike lanes from being installed across 207th Street or anywhere in a north-south corridor, in Inwood for that matter. And I think that the discussion would be better overall if we could revolve around some evidence-based practices. Like there's some real like economic numbers associated with the dining sheds and the open streets. And there's some real safety benefits to having hardened bike lanes in terms of morbidity to pedestrians and cyclists, and even people in cars are better off like when there are safe bike lanes installed. And I think that we need to bring that like empirical, like we're not reinventing the wheel. People have studied it. There's evidence of the way things work. And then we should go with the thing that works best, moves people the fastest, keeps people the safest, makes the most commerce. And it's not just about people's personal opinions. It's about actual research. Like this is the thing that actually works. And we need to bring that back into the discussion. And I haven't really heard that. I still don't understand why there's such a dispensation for people and their parked cars. Only 1 in 5 people in Inwood, 134, actually commute to work with a car. And 2/3 of people in Inwood do not even have access to a car. And so when you say that we're doing planning for the people who want to leave their parked cars in the streets, those parked cars not only are minority rules, but they're also, they're degrading the economy of our very cityscape. And I really would hope that we could pull the discussion back around. About loading zones, the city actually made rule changes. I missed last month's meeting. I don't know if you guys got your comments in for the proposed changes. I put a link in there for the loading zone regulations. I put in my comments about the way I think things should change. Maybe as a community board, you could put it in late, but if you want to, it's there.
Sorry, thank you. We're going to go Jim Berlin and then Ian S. We will come back to you.
First, I want to second what Leo said. As he pointed out, it doesn't make any sense for us to pass a resolution that we're pretty sure the board won't, follow. So I think, and I think this is sort of relative to, and Allegra, of course, has every right to espouse her extreme anti-car position. She has every right to do that. But in fact, there are people who use their cars to get back and forth to work or whatever they use them for. And in fact, these people going back and forth to work, helps our economy also with the money they earn. So we have to be somewhat more circumspect. So I think, This is a process, or this is an issue we need to study. And then, as Leo sort of pointed out, and as Allegra pointed out, there are all these groups that have their own view, and they all probably have some validity to them. And what we should ultimately synthesize is something that, you know, and obviously it's very hard to do, you know, takes all these stakeholders and you know, at least listens to what they're talking about. And you know, so I think what I'm alluding to is that we, again, have to be very circumspect with what we're doing, in the sense that we listen to everybody. And crafting this resolution, if we ever get one, may be very difficult to do. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but it's going to be difficult. And sometimes, you know, difficult things are very important. So thank you.
Ian.
Hey, everybody. I wanted to speak generally in support of the idea and concept of the outdoor dining sheds, not necessarily the execution and reality that some folks might be referring to with, you know, abandoned sheds and shoddy structures and poorly maintained or no longer used structures. I've certainly seen a fair share of that across the city. But I think that the sheds, when done right, as I see a lot of restaurants in our neighborhood doing right, provide a ton of value to the community and obviously to the business. And you know, I heard someone mention earlier, you know, that the outdoor dining sheds are conceding public space to private interests. I'd like to point out that, like Allegra said, that folks who own cars are just a different private interest. I think realistically, if you do away with dining sheds right now, tomorrow, they just go back to private parking spots. And I think that's a huge loss for the community. I'm in support of reimagining the ways that we use our streets, like the gentleman from the DOT was talking about earlier. But, you know, like he also said, those kinds of plans take 2 years on the shorter side and 5+ years on the capital improvement side. And I think if you get rid of the dining sheds at any space between now and when we're able to actually implement loading zones and better bike lanes and perhaps bump outs and expanding sidewalks, these just go back to car users. And I don't think that's the best use for the community. I don't know if CB12 has access to more up-to-date numbers on the actual number of car owners that exist in Uptown Manhattan. I think, like Allegra said, last thing that I saw was from 2018. It's like 18% of people. And that's a very few amount of people to get to use the streets for free. Parked cars are not transportation, they're just parked cars. So if you get rid of the dining sheds, it doesn't help move traffic along any better.
Thank you, Ian. All right. So, I mean, I guess I'm sort of curious, asking the committee if we want to not move forward with a resolution at this time. I mean, I'm sort of hearing the discussion and hearing myself. Sorry, I don't mean to keep this off. That, well, I want to be able to say, but it's like tonight, if I'm playing it back correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, we can sort of do a resolution on the permanent open dining or not, but people maybe don't feel quite ready to have it be something more broad, and that obviously has its challenges to kind of be more broad, you know, i.e. try to weave in all the various demands and making a statement about what we think our priorities are. but I really am, I want to defer to the committee of like how suggestions about how you think we should proceed. I mean, I think this is a good discussion. I think it's a good one to have. We by no means need to do a resolution.
So, Debbie, if I may, I think that we should. This is a great conversation. It's something that I think it's prevalent to the time now. I think that we, as a committee, should wait to see what is exactly that the council is going to pass. Like I said, you just informed me of the whole seasonal aspect of it, and I think that we can try to pass some type of resolution. I'm not sure how it's going to be taken on general board, and that might be an issue. Not saying that we shouldn't try, but I think if we have more information, we can kind of get to where we want it to go, versus we're kind of up in the air and we're just throwing something out there, either opposing or advocating for it.
Agreed. I mean, I guess my only thought was like, oh, like, I mean, this really would need to be pointed at our council member right now. Jim?
Thank you. This is sort of reiterating what I said, but I think, it's inherent with other people are saying too. We're not ready to create a resolution now. And furthermore, although we as a group, most of us, if not all of us, feel, there's little or no value to some of these dining sheds or in general or whatever. And certainly the height of the pandemic is over. So, people can't have indoor dining. Certainly, since this is such a major issue, it might be appropriate for us to have public hearings. And that would involve, again, inviting the various stakeholders. So at the very least, we are listening to what they're saying, because there may be aspects of this outdoor dining that we're not aware of that are actually, very salutary. And they don't just enrich the business, but, for whatever reason, people really enjoy eating outdoors. And if that's possible, again, so like I said, we're not ready. And I think, again, because this is, I'm just summarizing, we should hold a hearing or something so that people can, all sorts of stakeholders can come and tell us what they think. And then we might be ready to start putting a resolution together. That's my point of view.
Lyle, I'm just going to say what I started to say before. It seems to me for restaurants that are still open and still operating, and from the beginning had sheds that didn't completely comply with the program, that's not where there's been an enforcement focus at any point in the time when, so I mean, but that's neither here nor there. Like, it's happened, so that's a bygone. That is a bygone. I think, to Leo's point and Jim's point to an extent, that when this takes shape, like, we've chosen not to be part of the conversation as the people have debated what a permanent program is going to look like. Many people testified in the public hearings for the city council. Hopefully there'll be more rounds. But to Leo's point, like, there's going to be something, and then that maybe is a more salient thing for us to react to. Because again, I think restaurants will make different decisions based on what the program is. And many of them might tell you, oh, it's not worth it. And others will say it's worth it. And then we can react to the actual going forward program. And there's no point in resolving about what sort of spilled milk, perhaps. So good conversation. I feel good about the outcome. James Bosley, is that a new hand?
Yes, yes, it is a new hand. I'm new, but I feel that if this is an issue that the committee feels strongly about, strongly enough to create a reso for, I don't think we should consider whether or not the entire board passes it or not. I think it's up to us as a committee to go ahead and present a resolution on what our resolve is about the issue and let the board vote as it may. But I think we would be negligent in a way by not voting on a resolution if we feel strongly enough about that to create one. Thank you.
I tend to agree with you, James. But it's sort of feeling like we don't have enough oomph amongst ourselves to sort of take a stand. I mean, some community boards did things way back when on this. And there were certainly a lot of hearings. And yeah.
Is it possible, maybe, obviously with the recommendation of the rest of the committee, but to maybe hold off on the reso, maybe until next month? And I know we're supposed to have a meeting with public safety, but also maybe invite Councilmember De La Rosa and see what she can give us some information so that we can go on it. So that if we do propose a resolution, we have kind of more ammo for the fight versus, as a committee saying, hey, we don't support this for these reasons. Here you go. Just again, I hear everyone here, but I think I would like more information on how this program is moving forward before we add or implement anything into our resolution to kind of, advocate or go against whatever passes from the city council member or council members.
Okay, so I think that's an interesting idea, is to the extent that this resolution on the permanent dining program would be at this point pointed towards our city council member, that it would be helpful to understand how our city council member is thinking about it. And then we can react to that. I don't know that we can, with April meeting being the joint one, I'm not sure we can kind of fit it all together, but let me noodle on that and let me talk to the council member. And then, yeah. I would say, generally speaking, I'm with James Bosley. I'm just like, if we think something, we are the committee, and then other people can go against the recommendation of the committee or not. But understanding that we're not here just to tilt on windmills, but still. All right. So more on this in the future. Sorry, my cat is ripping up my couch. Lyle, before I lose you, I just wanted to ask on just sort of upcoming things from DOT. So consider this sort of an old business question while we still have you, that there are, and I know DOT is kind of a little understaffed, and that might be sort of slowing the roll on some projects, but do you have any sense from when we might hear from DOT again on Amsterdam Avenue between 181st and 188th? And is there anything else coming down the pike for DOT and CB12?
As far as Amsterdam, I know that we did the section from 188th north around so Fort George
Yes.
Avenue.
Right.
The plan is to go further south, so ideally between 181st and 188th. We're starting to have those conversations now internally as to the best approach to move forward. So we'll be having a few conversations, probably with some of the stakeholders around there. We've reached out again, so I challenge myself to assist us with this section of the stretch as well. I would say we would probably come to the community board at the earliest, probably sometime in the fall. Like I said, we're working on it now, so the plan ideally would be to spend, let's say, the spring and summer, probably putting a plan together with presentation sometime, I would say in the fall or winter months. You know, as we go a little bit further, you know, into the into the study and trying to develop a stakeholder list and trying to see what the plan would be for the southern portion. I'm calling it the southern portion in this instance. Yeah, it's gonna probably take us several more months. So I would say probably sometime in the fall at the earliest, but as the timeline gets a little clearer, I can definitely keep you in the loop, and we would be in touch with you, as that time draws closer, so we can put it on the agenda sometime in the near future. But I would probably say at the earliest, probably September, October-ish, maybe a little bit past there, I'd say.
Okay.
And what was your second question? I forgot what the second question was.
Well, okay, so that's helpful.
Mhm.
I guess generally, if there's anything that you're anything coming up in the next few months, but I will also say, is there anything to report on the project that was Riverside Drive by the entrance and exits to the Trans Manhattan and the entrance to the Fort Washington Park?
for the
Is
pedestrian ramp.
that's the long awaited project? We passed that resolution years
Yeah.
ago, it seems like
Yeah.
now. Is there any
Yeah.
news on that
No news.
specifically?
I know that when my colleagues had come to the board, it was essentially for a federal grant that was going to be kicked in.
Yes.
We're down the line. I think we're getting closer to that time. I can check in with our pedestrian group to see where we are on that much. I think it's approaching, but I'll verify with our pedestrian group. Regarding projects in general, we've actually been trying to figure out ideally the best course of action as far as just projects overall within DOT. This is pretty much our installation season. The spring and the summer as the weather is getting better. But I'm sure that there are things that we do have in the pipeline that we would be bringing to you. I don't have any specifics now. We're actually, like I said, we're sorting through the list of presentations, projects. As you mentioned before, we are a little behind as far as trying to, implement and install. So there might be some things that we might have to reshuffle, but yeah, we're having those conversations internally, and we'll keep you posted. Nothing I can mention now as far as specifics or what's to come, but definitely you'll be in the loop when things are a little bit more clarified and when we have a better idea what that schedule is.
Okay.
Mhm.
Oh, and just you mentioned something about, we're about to be in the season of DOT work.
Yeah.
I can't remember, is this something that you provide to Ebenezer? When you guys get to your road resurfacing
Yes. I think I just
season,
about to say, yeah.
what do you communicate that to each community board like all at once? And if so, when would that be coming out? I had a question actually from Jay Mazer, who couldn't be on the call tonight, just about road resurfacing. And I said, oh, let me see. I think there's actually a schedule.
Yeah. So very quickly, our milling and resurfacing schedule is about to kick off. Usually it starts around mid-March, again, when the weather gets better. Usually for the Northern Manhattan community boards, I do send the information directly to the district managers. Usually we get the list of upcoming locations about like several days in advance. We try to have everything for the following week on our website at the very least by the end of the previous week, so that residents would have at least the weekend to prepare for what's to come if we are to go into a certain neighborhood. I'm sure you've seen we post signage whenever we go into a neighborhood or along a particular corridor. We do try our best to give a few days advance notice, because we know it is some like a little bit shock to the system having to move the cars and that sort of thing. But usually when we do have our million resurfacing schedule underway, if it's anywhere in northern Manhattan, usually I like to send that information out to the community boards up here. So that way, if you're saying CB12, you at least know what's going on in CB9, because you might have to go through that neighborhood or those neighborhoods in order to get somewhere. So if there's anything that's usually taking place within northern Manhattan, i.e. say north of 110th, usually I do send that information to the community board district managers. If you want, I can add you to that list. And when I when I get the list, for the upcoming week, I can add you and the other transportation committee chairs in northern Manhattan. That might not be a bad idea, just so that you guys are in the loop as well. I assume I've been easier to pass that information, or at least post it on the community board website.
No, he'll share it. He'll share it with us.
But I can add you to that that email thread. And so if anything comes in northern Manhattan, I usually try to give a heads up to the boards. And if there are other locations, that you feel we need to add, you can always reach out to me, and we can see if it's if it can be added to to the list for the upcoming season, or it might be something we might be able to do to address it separately. But if there are any locations, you can definitely pass it along to me. I can pass it along to our road-based division. But you'll probably start seeing some notifications, I'd say, the next couple of weeks as they're starting to ramp up.
Okay. Great. And then I think Bruce Robertson and Jody Harrison have been sort of very patient. Jody had a sort of the list that she's been working somewhat with you and somewhat with Parks, et cetera, on the upper roadway of Riverside Drive. But I'm hoping we can come back to you during the month to sort of go through the punch list of like what's on your radar, which really isn't on the radar right now and can't be worked on, and all that, because I know that there was some work done on parts of it, but maybe DOT couldn't take up other parts of it. So I think it might just make sense to, sort of re-up the punch list with Jody, which Jody maintains, and just asking you to let's just get a plan for what, if stuff that DOT can be looking at or is looking at, sort of what's the plan to, to get back to us.
And if worst, we can always schedule a site visit, and we can walk the area if need be. So, that's always an option. If you would like, to kind of walk the area and see, just how things are going in real time. And then, we can have conversations on site if necessary. We can schedule a site visit if you'd like.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. I am being reminded that I completely flaked on sort of assigning out the crash data or reporting it myself for the past. What I'm going to do, because we didn't have it last month either, is that in January and February of 2023, there were 82 total crashes. I'm not positive all of February is in. There was actually a fatality. There were 127 injuries, and I think the reason that's so high is because that includes when the car drove into the Inwood Bar and Grill and injured 20 people or something like that. But that is a spot that's actually had other events. I feel like I saw something on Facebook about more fatalities in a recent weekend at the end of February, but I'm not seeing that on the report yet. But I don't know if that's just because the late February stuff isn't entirely in. But I will just say generally, you know, sort of my point of kind of having this a little bit more top of mind, as much as I keep forgetting to assign it out, is just so that we always have a pretty good sense for trouble spots, which if you look at it are like the places one would think up and down Broadway, around the 178th, 179th corridor, at 181st in Amsterdam, and along 207th are particular bad spots. Again, leaving the Henry Hudson and the Harlem River out of it, which those obviously have highway problems. And it looks like the fatality was at the Henry Hudson at the Dykeman exit is what it looks like to me, which is that person who was walking on the highway, and that was pretty tragic. With that, Jody.
Yeah, hi. You know, I just wanted to mention, Debbie and Lyle, that I think a site visit would be perfect. And one of the reasons I just want to mention, and Bruce brought it up also, is that we have now a huge project going on, or at least in the planning stages, with parks for the Lily Brown Playground, and having really safe access to that park is really important. And that would include lighting and, you know, safe sidewalks. We just had a recent shooting at 162nd and Riverside Drive. I think if there had been better lighting down there, maybe they would have found another place to, I mean, I hate to say that, but I think lighting is really important, and safe sidewalks and safe roadways. And with this huge project, a site visit to look at some of these problems would be really important. And super great. I'm excited, and I'll do it whenever you guys want to do it.
I put, Lyle, is it okay if I put Jody on point with you to schedule something? Usually Thursdays are better for me. Or like early-ish, like 9 a.m.
I'll do whatever.
On the other days. So why don't you connect up, and then sort of sometime in the back part of March or into April would be great.
Sure. We'll be in
okay.
touch. We can definitely put in the calendar. And
I feel like if Jody and or Bruce are on this, and it'll happen better than leaving me on things right now.
Yeah,
I think I always say that, so I'm just going to say it again.
And maybe include Steve. I don't know if Steve wants to come, but he's very aware of the problems that the area has as far as lighting, and it sort of overlaps because it's parks. I don't know.
All right. Well, let me.
Yeah. It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, duly noted. But then we'll probably should invite. Liz. All right. So like, let's just decide if like how, like yes on parks if we. But maybe not, just depending how we want to focus it.
Yeah, I'll let you decide.
We'll talk about that offline. Okay, so Allegra's at a new hand.
No, I just wanted to ask about reading the crash mapper statistics, but you did it, so I appreciate it very much.
No, and I appreciate that you always address my deficit of memory skills right now.
I don't think it's your deficit. I think you should just delegate now. I think Lyle should do it. He does this stuff, and he's here.
No, I'm not delegating it to DOT. But actually, I'm going to take that to one last thing before I let you all go. That's CB12 housekeeping for the committee, and is so we got a note from the chair today, because, and I hadn't thought about this. So Chanel supports our committee, and obviously each committee has support from the office. during our meetings. But what happened in the in-person days, if people remember, is that whichever staffer from the office was supporting the committee would make sure that your meeting started, you had everything that you needed, and you would go on your merry way. So during the pandemic and the Zoom era, they've all been on all our calls all night. So they're trying to go back to managing their hours again in the more traditional way, their work hours. And so basically I'm going to ask for people who would be willing to manage some of the Zoom aspects once. So Chanel would still get us started. And then they're just asking for one or two people like that I can put forth, let's say 2 names from the committee who can be helpful during the meeting. With just
I volunteered to do that.
okay. And then can I get one more person? I think I'm supposed to give 2 names. Okay, well, all right, we'll deal with that separately. And then can I ask like 2 of you to share like alternating months for the crash mapper data? It only takes a few seconds, but leaving it to me has not turned out so well.
I can help with that, Debbie. I'll take
Okay.
notes on them during that portion. I'll give the update reports on it.
Okay. Thank you. Awesome. With that, again, I guess, Leo, do you know on next month's meeting if we're going to use our meeting time or the public safety day in time?
Yeah,
For the joint.
Yeah, it was agreed upon in the last committee meeting because of Durham, I believe, was that we will use it on our meeting day. So public safety will come to our meeting and then we'll have the joint meeting done. So it'll be the first Monday, I think was the 6th.
Oh, maybe it's falling during Passover.
Yes, Passover, I'm
Their
sorry.
meeting. Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
so
okay. So
the third, they're supposed to meet with us and we'll
Okay.
have the.
okay, all right. Then all right, so then I will see everybody in April on our normal that channel. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second from James Bosley, I see. Thank you all. Interesting discussion. And we'll talk along the way. Night.
Hi, everyone.
Night, everyone.
Good night.